Major League Baseball team. Don't make decisions. And credibility in this situation is worse than losing your job.
Good morning, everybody. This is another edition of the Pass Ball Show, brought to you by Two Ways, One Passion Food Truck. Brought to you by St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. And, of course, by JohnPLA.com. Happy New Year to everybody. Hopefully everybody's having a happy and a healthy, big day, obviously, in not just the United States, but the entire world, as we think about the year of 2020, which obviously is the start of a new decade. A lot of us will think about how much older we're getting. Thinking of a couple things that I want to get into today. Always a reminder, the show belongs to you. So anything that's on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America, please let me know. You could give a show a call, 732-364-3598, or you could comment during the live streaming of the broadcast on YouTube. I was really thinking about this, and I decided to really put my research where my mouth is. And one of the narratives that I've had is that Major League Baseball owners are very selective in what they want to do in regards to supporting a baseball team. And supporting a baseball team is making sure that you have the best players that you possibly can, but also from a competitive standpoint to have the best team that you could have. And don't let anything get in the way of that happening. Obviously, you think of long rebuilds as they exist, not just in baseball, but in all sports. And the reason that some teams decide to do that, you have a veteran heavy team with some players that are getting near the end of the line, and the production is nowhere near what the back of the baseball card says. So you decide to get a little bit younger, but getting a little bit younger is not guaranteeing you to get a little bit better over time. It's not a guarantee that if you lose 100 games in Major League Baseball in a given season, that the future is automatically going to be bright. It takes some hard work to make sure you develop and bring in the young players that you need, but the talented young players, not just people that happen to be young, not just somebody that happens to be 20 to 22 years old. You want that player to have talent. If that's a pitcher, you want that pitcher to be somebody you could expect to be part of your team for a long time. If it's a hitter, you want to understand and appreciate that player's young talent, that they're going to be a factor in a game for a series of years. So, my issue has always been owners have tried to use every excuse since the adaptation of baseball to keep players' salaries down. And there are two different things here. There's the owners being cheap, and then there's the other aspect where the owners are trying to hold the players down. I do think that those are two separate discussions that we could have, but I'm going to focus more on the former today. That baseball, going back to the days of the reserve clause, and the owners have done what they need to do to save themselves as much money. There's been a battle that has existed ever since Curt Flood, who, by the way, should deserve some more credit and possibly enshrinement in the baseball's Hall of Fame because of the sacrifice that he made. Marvin Miller, who did everything that he did over the course of the 1970s, getting to know the baseball players, treating them or basically looking at them as his children, abolishing the reserve clause, the Peter Seitz decision, and of course you had collusion happening in the 1980s, which followed the strike of 1981, of course the strike of 1994, all over the same thing. The fact that Major League Baseball owners wanted control over the amount of money that players were making. We look at the four major sports as they exist right now, which, in case you're not on the same wavelength as me, I'm telling you, is Major League Baseball, the National Football League, the National Basketball Association, and the National Hockey League. You can talk about any other sports, but these are the four sports that I spend the most time talking about on the show. Not that none of the other sports are relevant, but when I make the comparison, when we talk about whether it's the Hall of Fame or salaries and payroll for teams, the four major sports, baseball, football, basketball, and hockey are always my reference or my equilibrium. So one of the things that owners have thrown out there and have said, and you've almost gotten to a point where you treat it as fact, is that small markets in Major League Baseball financially cannot compete with the larger markets. And I'm going to debunk that theory right now. In fact, I'm going to take that theory and prove it as wrong as we possibly can in this very moment. You look at the prime examples of those quote-unquote small markets as they exist in Major League Baseball. Tampa Bay, the Tampa Bay Rays, the Oakland Athletics, the Pittsburgh Pirates, the Cleveland Indians. And I'll mention the Miami Marlins for this reason. They have one of the lowest payrolls in Major League Baseball and have shown time after time their unwillingness to go above and beyond to what we consider the major markets as they exist in sports. Now, the first thing I have to say is a point that I've repeated before, and I'll make sure that I bring this out there again. The salary caps as they exist in the other three major sports. Now, the salary caps are different in the National Football League and the National Basketball Association and the National Hockey League, but they provide to the owners what the expectation is supposed to be in regards to how much they're supposed to pay their players. Now, you have a certain amount. Once you go over that, you're either in a penalty if it's a hard cap, or in a spot where you're going to have to be very careful to maneuver your salaries from that standpoint. But what happens is the majority of the teams in the National Football League, the National Basketball Association, and the National Hockey League all have around the same payroll. And you look at it, sometimes it fluctuates. You can look at, the Miami Dolphins in the National Football League have a lot of money coming off of the cap. The Indianapolis Colts are in a similar situation, but the reasons that teams do that is they look forward to free agency to be able to splurge and bring in a lot more stronger players that are making a lot more money. Now, that doesn't happen in baseball. And the reason that doesn't happen in baseball is a reason that you would think this benefits the players. There's no salary cap in Major League Baseball, which means that a team can go above and beyond. If they wanted to spend $300 million in a respective payroll, they could. Yes, the luxury tax is put in there to penalize teams that go over, 208 million, 228 million, 248 million. There's different levels that you're going to be taxed at a certain level. And it doesn't matter how deep your pockets are as an owner. You're going to get to a point where you're like, man, that's a lot of money to be paying on taxes. That's a lot of extra money to be throwing away just because we're choosing to spend freely. The salary cap that doesn't exist is supposed to be a positive for the players. Teams can spend as much money as they want, but what has happened is the lack of a salary cap in Major League Baseball is a detriment to the players and is a benefit to the owners. The owners are using any excuse that they can, including market size, which I'm going to touch on in about a moment, to spend as little as they want if they choose to. And I have a problem with that. I don't have an issue with any of the teams that are spending, even the mid-market teams that are spending between 150 and 180 or are right short of what we call the luxury tax threshold. I'm not going to get on the Mets. I'm not going to get on the Phillies. I'm not going to get on the Giants and the Cubs and the Dodgers, even the Minnesota Twins, especially if they go out there and they sign themselves Josh Donaldson. There's a lot of teams in baseball that are doing what they're supposed to. But I have an issue with the teams that are not and are using the market size of where their team is located and demographics as an excuse for not having a payroll above a certain level. Now, the first team I want to talk about is the Tampa Bay Rays. Now, their payroll rank at this moment is 28th in Major League Baseball. And it stands out because There's 30 teams in Major League Baseball, and the Tampa Bay Rays have been the poster child for doing more with less. And I spent a lot of time using a site called SpotTrack, SPOTRAC.com, to basically diffuse this situation here, because the Tampa Bay Rays and their owner will tell you that because of the market size of Tampa Bay, they don't have the ability to spend any more money in payroll. Yet, Tampa Bay has other sports teams. They have the Buccaneers in football, whose payroll is about twice of that of their Major League Baseball team. Now, it's understandable. In football, you're paying more players, right? We have to put everything on the line and make this as equal as possible. You're talking about 40, maybe 45 players in baseball. In the National Football League, you're talking anywhere between 60 and 80 and maybe even more players that are all getting paid. So you'd understand that even if every player on a baseball team was getting paid the same amount as a football player, that there would be more football players, and therefore a payroll would be higher for a football team than it would be for a baseball team. And sorry for using the most basic of language here to try to describe it, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands that, all right, a traditional National Football League payroll will be higher than that of a Major League Baseball payroll, but it shouldn't be double. And it is in the case of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who, by the way, their 185 or so million that they have allocated for payroll is within the top 8 of the sport, not near the bottom part of the sport. So the Tampa Bay Buccaneers don't use the market size as an excuse of why they can't have a certain payroll level or pay their players a certain amount of money in the National Football League. The Tampa Bay Lightning are a hockey team. They have just tad under $80 million allocated for their payroll. Now, the salary cap in the National Hockey League is slightly over. It's like 82 million, 81 million and change or something like that. And we're also talking about less players, potentially 30 players tops, maybe a little bit more that are part of a given payroll. So you understand why hockey payrolls are naturally, from a dollar amount or a numerical amount, being less than that of a Major League Baseball team. But you look at the Tampa Bay Lightning, who have no problem being just slightly under $2 million under the salary cap in the National Hockey League, about $18 million or $28 million over when it comes to the salary floor. And you've heard me talk about this before, about the need, if Major League Baseball is going to implement a salary cap, it's just as important that they implement a salary floor to make sure that owners will spend a certain amount of money just like they do in the National Hockey League. So we're talking about market size in Tampa Bay. Baseball teams claiming poverty. Football team has no problem having a top 8 payroll in all of the National Football League. The hockey team has no problem being within the top 10 or the top 12 in all payrolls throughout the sport. We talk about the Oakland Athletics and Moneyball and Billy Beane, and the fact that the Oakland Athletics cannot afford to have a payroll like the other teams in Major League Baseball. They have to go Moneyball. They have to use analytics and bring in players that are undervalued by other teams. Now, that could be a philosophy. There's nothing wrong with that. It's worked. It's gotten the Oakland Athletics into the playoffs. I don't believe is ever going to help them win a World Series. I don't believe they're ever going to win a World Series with that type of mentality, but that's just me. So their $109 million payroll at the moment, thanks to SpotTrack.com, is 26th in all Major League Baseball. And all you hear about is the Oakland Athletics. They can't do it. They don't have the ability to spend any more money. And you look at the Oakland, soon-to-be Las Vegas Raiders, as they sit in the National Football League with some cap space available. There's no question about it. Their payroll is about $172 million. So you're looking a little bit less than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, about the top half of the league. So even though the Raiders are moving, they're not claiming poverty as the reason why they can't pay their football players. They're going out there giving Derek Carr the extension and the contract that he needs. Willing to pay for Antonio Brown, even though Antonio Brown was not willing to play for them. So the Raiders haven't had any issues paying any of their players. Yes, they're moving, but the Raiders aren't claiming poverty as the reason why they can't pay their players like the Oakland Athletics are. Now, the biggest example that I'm going to make right here, which I think should prove that Major League Baseball owners are using market size as an excuse of why they can't pay their players or why they can't have a legitimate enough payroll to support their fans. The Pittsburgh Pirates, at this moment right now, have actually the 30th highest payroll in all Major League Baseball. The $83.76 million, according to Spot Track, is 30th out of 30 teams in Major League Baseball. Their owners claiming poverty. They just fired the general manager and the manager. They're going through a major house cleaning there. And, you understand that there's probably a need for a change. Clubhouse chemistry wasn't there. You got players fist fighting. You got the closers sexually assaulting little girls. And, so much bad karma that exists in one locker room. And it's time for a change. It's time for somebody to come in there and bring it, give the team, put the team in a little bit of a different direction. But this has been a narrative that existed or has existed in the market of Pittsburgh for a very long time. Going back to the time of the 1990s, when Barry Bonds and Bobby Bonilla and Doug Drabeck and Andy Van Slyke were all there, and a team that had a legitimate chance to win a World Series in 1992 and 1993. Now, it didn't work out, but unfortunately for the Pirates, instead of bringing in good players, retaining some of them, now it would have made sense for Barry Bonds to be a lifelong Pittsburgh Pirate. Barry Bonds could have been the next Willie Stargell. Barry Bonds could have been the next Roberto Clemente. Instead, he went the Dave Parker route because the Pirates didn't want to pay Dave Parker either. And Barry Bonds ends up going to San Francisco, but the Pirates continue for about 20 years to tell their fans they don't have the ability to not only go out in free agency and compete with the likes of the other teams that are winning World Series every year, but don't have the ability to retain their own players. And it's Pittsburgh. We talk about Pittsburgh. We don't mention Pittsburgh as being a small market. The only people that consider Pittsburgh a small market are the Pittsburgh Pirates and their ownership. The Pittsburgh Steelers in the National Football League have one of the highest payrolls in all the NFL. $206 million. Now, they have a lot of dead money. Guys like Antonio Brown and, Roethlisberger being hurt. They have a lot of players that are counting against their payroll that aren't playing for them or didn't play for them this season. But the Pittsburgh Steelers can afford to have a $206 million payroll. Part of it is because of the NFL and the fact that it doesn't give its owners the rights to set its own payroll like it does in baseball. But I also wanted to mention the Pittsburgh Penguins, very popular hockey team, a team that's won 3 Stanley Cups within the last 10 years, has been one of the more successful franchises throughout the history of the sport, has a payroll of $81.37 million, which is just basically $132,000 under what the salary cap is in the National Hockey League. So why can the Pittsburgh Penguins afford to have a top 3 payroll as it applies to all of the National Hockey League? Why can the Pittsburgh Steelers be able to afford to have a top 2 payroll in all the National Football League, but the Pittsburgh Pirates are claiming poverty, are screaming market size, and have the lowest payroll in all Major League Baseball? It's honestly, I'm calling bullshit on Major League Baseball owners, which I've been doing that for a while. Finally, we'll talk about Cleveland. The Indians. Now, their payroll is not horrible, but what do you hear? They went out there and they traded Corey Kluber. They may not be done. They may be looking to trade Mike Clevenger. They would like to, in an ideal scenario, as we hit the halfway point here in the Pass Ball Show, trade Francisco Lindor because they don't believe that they could pay him in free agency. And this is the issue that I have with the Indians. It's not where they currently stand at the $129.33 million, according to SpotTrack.com, 22nd in all Major League Baseball. It's the fact that they traded Trevor Bauer because they couldn't afford to pay him long term. They traded Corey Kluber. Now, listen, they were able to trade his contract when maybe he's not the same pitcher that won a couple Cy Young Awards for them. Could be considered a good move. Could be considered a good move for the Texas Rangers to get 2 years out of him, see what happens. I don't have as much of an issue with that trade, but if you're looking to trade Lindor instead of pay him, I don't understand why. The Indians say, hey, we're a small market team. Cleveland Cavaliers won an NBA championship a handful of years ago. Didn't have an issue rolling out the red carpet for LeBron James, paying him more than anybody in NBA history at the time. Their payroll, they're actually over the salary cap right now, $127.52 million. So they have to go to the books and figure out ways to maybe not report all of their salary. So they're over the salary cap in the NBA. Nobody within the Cleveland Cavaliers organization, Dan Gilbert, the owner, to anybody in the front office, is complaining that the Cleveland Cavaliers are over the salary cap in the NBA. But poverty exists in Major League Baseball with the Indians. The Cleveland Browns have one of the top 5 highest payrolls in all of the National Football League. Now, we can talk about the worst team money could buy. You put Beckham and Landry and Kareem Hunt together with Baker Mayfield and Chubb and Olivier Vernon and Myles Garrett. They do got Denzel Ward. They got some very good players there. But it's the worst team money can buy. I mean, they got no continuity. It doesn't matter that they're a top 5 team in regards to payroll in the National Football League, but it matters to the argument that I'm making that Cleveland is not a small market city. How could Cleveland be a small market city in baseball, but not a small market city in football and in basketball? How could Tampa Bay be a small market team or city in baseball, but not be a small market city in football and in hockey? How could Pittsburgh be a small market city in baseball and not be a small market city in football and in hockey? How could Cleveland be a small market city in baseball but not be a small market team or city in football and basketball? I have a problem with that. I'm going to do a little bit of trivia in a little bit. If you heard my last show, we spoke about the 2 calendars that I got. It's basically daily trivia. We're only going to do 1 question each today for the day that we got to in a year. So let's say 3 days go by. I think Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Yeah, 3 days will go by before my next show that I do on Saturday. So we'll answer all the questions that are between today and Saturday. So we'll get to baseball trivia in a little bit. Mets trivia, baseball trivia. The goal is for baseball trivia, and I'll write this down so I don't forget, is to answer 90% of the questions correctly. And then for the Mets trivia, to answer 95% of the questions correctly. So we'll get into that in a couple minutes. So I was thinking about hockey, and John Tortarella, coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets, has been there nearly 20 years. Since 99, he took over the New York Rangers in a couple games, then coached the Tampa Bay Lightning for a little while, won a Stanley Cup in 2003, 2004, went to the Rangers, Vancouver for a year, Columbus for 5 years. And you could say that there's a lot of similarities between John Tortarella and that of Billy Martin. John Tortarella is very outspoken. He demands a lot out of his players, but also has had a track record of getting more out of his players than other coaches. Now, Columbus is in a situation here where are they? They have a sub 500 record after three straight winning seasons, some deep runs in the playoffs, including last year where they made it to the second round, played 10 playoff games. There's an understanding that at some point the end is going to come near. The bloom is going to come off the rose. The ability for John Tortarella to get through to his players is not going to exist for a very long period of time or a long shelf life. Same thing you could say about Billy Martin. But what made Billy Martin great was the fact that he made every single one of the teams that he coached better. And the same thing you could say about John Tortarella. The New York Rangers were better. They made it to a Stanley Cup Finals. They finished first in their conference a couple times. Same thing with Tampa Bay. And Columbus, you're seeing a very good team for at least the last 3 years before this year. So a lot of it has to do with the hands-on coaching, the hard-nosed coaching that John Tortarella brings to the table. And I just think it's fascinating because you really are looking at a guy that may not be so conventional, especially in the society that we live in now when we talk about players needing to be coddled, players that need to be hugged and told that they're great, players that you have to be careful how you criticize them. And a guy like John Tortarella may have a couple more stops left in his career as a National Hockey League coach, but I bet if he's let go by the Columbus Blue Jackets, will get a job with another team and probably lead that team to some prominence. So the next thing I wanted to get into, talking a little bit about Black Monday. We kind of previewed it, and I was very surprised that Doug Marrone, the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, is retained for another year. Now, it looks like, at least coming down from the owner, Khan, that a lot of the blame for the lack of success with the Jacksonville Jaguars was thrown at the feet of Tom Coughlin. Now, Tom Coughlin's got to understand, a veteran, great coach, guy that's going to the Hall of Fame, there's no question about it, means a lot for the fans of the New York Giants and the history of the New York Giants franchise, but also a lot with the Jacksonville Jaguars being their first coach, led them to some prominence early, and you may not consider the latest handful of years that he was in the front office with the Jacksonville Jaguars as a complete success. But the fact that he did go back to the old disciplinarian roots made things very hard for the players, and players now are going to complain a lot more than they did before. They're softer now. There's no question. The guys that are in that locker room of the Jacksonville Jaguars are similar to the locker room of any NFL team. Players now are softer mentally than they ever were before. If they're going to get fined for something, they're going to consider it petty, and they're going to whine and complain about it. Now, that part, I don't mind up to a certain point, but Tom Coughlin's got to be smart enough to understand that to be this strict military disciplinarian in the year of 2019 was not going to work long term. And he became an easy scapegoat for the Jacksonville Jaguars and actually may have saved Doug Marrone his job for next season. Now, Pat Shurmur ends up being let go by the New York Giants. Not much of a surprise there. I don't think Pat Shurmur necessarily deserved to be fired after 2 seasons. But at some point, if you're Mr. Mara and Mr. Tisch and Dave Gettleman, you got to ask yourself this question. Do you see yourself as the New York Football Giants winning a Super Bowl with Pat Shurmur as your head coach? Is this the right guy to lead the New York Football Giants to prominence? And the biggest example that I can make is comparing the Houston Astros. Houston Astros in Major League Baseball were going through one of the biggest rebuilds that we've really seen in the last 30, 40 years in all of professional sports. They decided that they were going to, once Craig Biggio and Jeff Bagwell, And the Lance Berkman and the guys that were there, Roy Oswald, Billy Wagner, all different times leaving, of course. But once those guys were on, playing for different organizations, moving on with the rest of their careers, the Astros were going to rebuild from the bottom up. They did a very good job doing that, but started with Brad Mills as their manager. Decided at some point that they were going to move on from Brad Mills to Bo Porter. Now, when Bo Porter was hired, he was hired with the understanding that this was a deep rebuild. The expectations were the Astros were going to be bad for at least a couple years. A couple of years go by, and the Houston Astros asked themselves the same question that Mr. Tisch and Mr. Mara asked themselves as the coaches of the New York Football Giants. Could you see yourself winning a World Series with Bo Porter as your manager? And the Astros decided no. Let Bo Porter go, hired A.J. Hinch, and they won a World Series with A.J. Hinch as their manager. Now, does it mean that they couldn't have won a World Series with Bo Porter? No. But they believed that Porter was not the answer. Pretty similar to the New York Giants deciding that, hey, if they have a good draft, if they get into free agency, they put a better squad on the football field next season, that they are going to be better suited to have somebody else coach their football team. So whether it's Mike McCarthy, whether it's Rule from Baylor, whether there's some other candidate that comes off the board, Jason Garrett, is still the head football coach of the Dallas Cowboys at the moment. His contract runs out in a couple weeks. You've heard about that being a possibility. But the Giants, basically what they said is not that the expectations should have been better for this year. They went to their second string quarterback, their quarterback of the future, Sad Eli Manning, went through some growing pains with Daniel Jones, also went through some growing pains with Saquon Barkley, kind of went through that little bit of a sophomore slump. He's a good player. He's going to be one of the best backs in football. But he had some struggles. And a lot of this could have been expected. So did Pat Shurmur, because he didn't have a miracle run in the New York Giants, deserve to lose his job? No. But the Giants at some point have to make a decision if they feel like they could win a Super Bowl with the head coach that they have. And they made the decision that they could. You look at Cleveland. Freddie Kitchens as the head coach there. A lot of turmoil, a lot of trouble, a lot of people running their mouths. Not a sign of a good leader. And Freddie Kitchens may have been in over his head. Did a good job as the offensive coordinator a year before in Cleveland. This year, he didn't distinguish himself as a head coach. A lot of talent there, and you could blame the players. Bring in a new coach. Maybe they get better results. Hey, they fired their general manager. John Dorsey's out too. But how many times are you going to switch general managers? How many times are you going to switch coaches? What are you going to do in Cleveland? This is a team that's been striving to get better since they were granted a pro football team again. Cleveland Browns moved to Baltimore. Abandoned the history that they had from the days of Jim Brown and Otto Graham. Paul Brown as the head coach. Even the Bernie Kosar days. They've done nothing since they've had a National Football League franchise. Who do you blame? Keep blaming the general manager, the coach? I'm going to hold every single one of these players that are on this roster accountable. From the Myles Garretts to the Odell Beckhams, the Baker Mayfields. These players got to show something next year, and it shouldn't matter who the coach is. It shouldn't matter who the general manager is. It's on these players and their legacy to show a little bit more heart, a little bit more ability, and compete a little bit better. A little bit of a recap of the show today. We exposed the fact that small markets in Major League Baseball are just an idea, an excuse made by owners who don't want to pay their players, who don't want to have a certain amount of payroll allocated. Tampa Bay Lightning in the National Hockey League has almost as high of a payroll as the Tampa Bay Rays in Major League Baseball. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, top 5 payroll in all the National Football League. Nobody's claiming that Tampa Bay is a small market, only the baseball team is. Same thing in Oakland, same thing in Pittsburgh, same thing in Cleveland. Spoke a little bit about John Tortarella being the NHL's version of Billy Martin. And obviously the coaching carousel, which will continue to go around in the National Football League. A little bit of a surprise, there hasn't been so many coaching changes, at least at this moment. Jason Garrett more than likely isn't coming back to Dallas. Jerry Jones will probably let his contract run out. But you got Ron Rivera getting the job in Washington as their new head coach. You know, Carolina's looking for a head coach. Obviously, Cleveland, the Giants. See what ends up turning out. We'll be back with you Saturday. We'll talk a little bit football. We'll do a preview of the National Football League playoffs. You got a good Saturday action. You got Buffalo and Houston, followed by Tennessee, New England. And then Sunday, of course, you got Philadelphia, New Orleans. And then you got Minnesota, New Orleans. I apologize. And then Philadelphia is playing Seattle. So obviously some good action there. We'll talk a little bit of a recap of the CFB playoff games. Get ready for the national championship game where we got Clemson playing LSU. And listen, for what you saw at LSU last week, it's hard to imagine anybody beating them. They look like the best team in the sport by a mile. And it's going to be a lot for Dabo Swinney, Trevor Lawrence, and the Clemson Tigers to ask for to be able to compete with this LSU team. Right before we go, we'll throw the 2 questions out there. And the first one is going to be, and I'm reading it for the first time, the baseball one. And we'll pull this up. We're going to see we're either going to have a 0% percentage or a 100% percentage. It says, name the only Canadian-born player that's in the Baseball Hall of Fame. And it's A, Steve Dunn, B, Fergie Jenkins, C, Red Long, D, Tip O'Neill. And I'm going final answer, Fergie Jenkins. And the answer is Fergie Jenkins. So we're 1 out of 1 when it comes to the Major League Baseball trivia. New York Mets trivia. January 1st. Question. What pitcher threw 32 2/3 consecutive scoreless innings in 2012 to set a team record? And I'm thinking, and you know what? I'm actually thinking about going away from the easy answer. But I'm going to take the safe answer. I'm going to go with R.A. Dickey. And the answer is R.A. Dickey. So we're 100%, 1 out of 1 baseball trivia, 1 out of 1 New York Mets trivia. We got 365 more to go. This is the Passball Show, brought to you by 2A's One Passion Food Truck, located in Scranton, Pennsylvania, by JohnPLA.com, and St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. God bless you. We'll see you on Saturday. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.